Greetings. My passage this week is Matthew chapter 5, verses 13 through 20. You might recognize it as the second and third major blocks in the Sermon on the Mount. The idea of we are the salt of the earth and the light of the world, and then following that up with Jesus's statement that he did not come to end the law, but to fulfill, to make it complete and whole, fulfill the law. So we're looking at that this week and thinking along those lines. And to do that, I want to give you a little bit of background on both the book of Matthew and the Sermon on the Mount. The book of Matthew, the author composes this in part to highlight Jesus as the new Moses. It's in Matthew that we find that Jesus is called Emmanuel, God with us, and this kind of plays on the idea that Moses leaves in Deuteronomy, leaves the people saying God will provide a new leader to show that God is with you. Jesus in this book has 5 major blocks of teaching. These echo the 5 books of Moses, Genesis through Deuteronomy. So Jesus is here shown as the new Moses who has come to lead the people out of slavery and bondage and into freedom and life with God, just the same way Moses did. The Sermon on the Mount is the first of these 5 teaching blocks. It is by far the most famous of the blocks of teaching in the book of Matthew. It is not, at least likely, it is not one long sermon. It is a compilation of various things that Jesus said and various teachings that he had. I would imagine that Jesus had a lot of this stuff floating around in his head. These were the major themes that he would hit again and again in his ministry, that he would make statements like these, like the Sermon on the Mount, like those things found here. He would make them often. He probably taught every day, and so a lot of this stuff he repeated fairly frequently. He would probably say things regularly. He would probably say, "You are the salt of the earth," and then follow that up with an explanation of what he meant. The same with "You are the light of the world." He would probably follow that up with an explanation. He probably paired these together pretty frequently. But this is, the whole sermon is just a compilation of the things Jesus said, and it comes right after the temptation narratives. So we have the temptation narratives, the choosing of the 12, and then right into the Sermon on the Mount. In other words, Jesus is tempted, chooses people to follow him, and then gives them instruction for how to live the way that he lives and the way that he wants us to live. This is very deliberate. It's meant to show us that this is how we resist temptation, resist evil, is living like Jesus, and here's how we live like Jesus. This meditating on these instructions that he has left us, these teachings that he has left us. And right away, the first thing we see is that it starts off with the Beatitudes. Blessed are, and this kind of blessed line, God is going to bless those individuals who have these specific character traits. If you're a peacemaker, if you hunger and thirst for righteousness, these kinds of these kinds of traits, the meek, anybody who expresses these traits is blessed. Not specifically Christians. This is anyone. From any background, from any walk of life. Jesus just starts the sermon with, these are good characteristics blessed by God. Those who hunger and thirst after righteousness. Those who are peaceful. Those who are meek. These qualities, no matter who expresses them, we ought to look at them and say, well, that's good. Inasmuch as you do that, you are blessed by God and you are you are reflecting God. And that's a really great way to start this whole passage. To start it by saying, these people, no matter what their background, who embody these characteristics, are doing the right thing. Sometimes I think we get a little bit too caught up in whether or not a person goes to church or is a Christian. And Jesus starts us off with anyone. Now, he doesn't leave us there, but he starts us there. And we need to recognize that in the world around us. It helps us to build common ground. Anyone who does these things is somebody who we can relate to and work with, in as much as they live out these characteristics. And that's a great way to approach this. Jesus is then going to flip it. Notice the change in pronouns from anyone, a relative pronoun, to you, a direct address to Jesus' followers. This is no longer anyone. This is no longer these characteristics are blessed. This is a direct discussion of those people who want to call themselves Christians. You who say you follow me, you are meant to be the salt of the earth. You who follow me, you are meant to be the light of the world. And these metaphors are then supposed to trigger in us to not just live out the Beatitudes, but to live out all of what Jesus wants for us, which includes those characteristics found in the Beatitudes. In other words, Jesus starts out, anyone who does this, they're blessed. Anybody who has these great characteristics, they're blessed. But to you who come after me, there's a little bit more at stake. You become the salt. You become the light, in as much as you reflect me. And so there's a little bit of a bigger quality to that. That's where my reflection kind of takes us this week, is what does it mean to be the salt of the earth, the light of the world? I kind of want to get into that, especially for me, the light of the world aspect that I've never really considered how that three-pronged metaphor kind of plays out in life. And so that it was nice for me to get to reflect on all of that, and how Jesus uses light as multiple analogies, all in the same overarching scheme. And that's kind of fun for me. That's where I took it this week. Then we get into Jesus talking about the law and how it's going to be fulfilled. Sometimes we get to thinking that the idea of the law being fulfilled is Jesus dying and rising again, because we think of the stereotypical all prophecies speak to Jesus, and Jesus is pushing. Jesus furthers the prophecies, and so everything is fulfilled in his life, death, and resurrection. But there's also a sense in which what he's saying goes deeper than that. It's saying that all of the ethical commands of the law, those are still in play. Those are still intact. Those still need to be respected. Now, I don't take this as every word of the commands. In other words, just because the Bible in the Old Testament says don't wear cotton and polyester together in one outfit does not mean we cannot do that. Rather, what Jesus is saying is that the ethical mandates that are behind the commands, those will never pass away. Even if the commands themselves, even if the little individual laws were specifically for a group of people at a specific time, those laws might not be enforceable now. But the spirit, the idea that motivated them, the idea of being pure and holy, the idea of loving your neighbor and loving God, all of those ideas, the true heart of the law, that's what Jesus is saying is being fulfilled in him and will not pass away. Because even by Jesus's day, obviously some of those laws were obsolete, even to the Jews of his day. And since that time, more of them have become obsolete. And even when the apostles met in the book of Acts in chapter 15 to talk about what do Gentile Christians have to do to be a part of this community, the one thing they never really talk about is keeping the laws of Leviticus. They talk about keeping the spirit behind them and working with God, but they don't talk about keeping these individual laws. And so I think what Jesus is saying here is to fulfill the law is to live a life that is based on the ethics, the morality that is behind the laws and governs them, and living that out well in your own culture. So I think that's kind of the background to Matthew 5. I hope that means something to you. I hope you get something out of this. And as always, if I can be of assistance, if you have questions or comments, please don't hesitate to ask. Send me a line, and I would love to get more into that. And until we meet again, God bless.